In this tutorial we're going to take a look at online applications. Online applications is the ability for a prospective tenant of ours to go online and to fill out an online questionnaire that we have created for them so that they can apply to rent one of our properties. So they become prospective tenants of ours, and at one stage they may actually become an actual tenant as well. So this is three main areas. First of all, we have to create the questionnaire for them the tenants to fill out. Next, we need to get the tenants to answer the questions and to fill out the questionnaire, and then we'll take a look at what we do with those applications once we're finished. So first of all, we go to the functions menu and we choose online applications. Now this is where we create the actual questions of our questionnaire. There's a number of buttons along here. I can use this button to create a new questionnaire, or I can open an existing one. So I'm going to open an existing one. I've got one here called Demo, which I just created. Now each one of these here are questions. As you can see, it's a very short questionnaire, and if I click on one of these, you'll see it highlights it in yellow, so we can see each individual question. I've actually got 4 different questions so far. Although you notice some of these questions aren't actually questions at all, like this one here. It doesn't actually have any text box. We're not expecting a response, it's just a heading. So what I can now do is I can add some more questions. So I might use this button here to add a new question, and I might ask for the person's full name. And it adds our new question to the bottom of the application. Now what I can do is I can use these 2 buttons here to move the question up and down. So I select it first, make sure it's yellow, then I can use the up and down arrows to move it up or down through our application, basically changing the sort order. Now let's take a look, let's edit this question, take a look at some of the other properties on the question that I sort of glossed over. If we take a look, the first bit, we enter the caption. In this case I was asking for the full name. Next we have a question type, and there's quite a few different question types we can choose from, so I'll go through each of these. First one is text. Now that's probably, most of your questions will just be text questions. The person can type anything they like into a text box. Next one, they could be a number, like you might ask someone how many months they've lived in their current address, so that could be a number. And on mobile devices, quite often it will display as a numeric keypad rather than an alphabetic keypad. We can also choose to get a date. For example, we might want to ask someone what their date of birth is, so that we can ask for a date. We also have the option of just a checkbox, which is just a tick box, which means that the person either has to tick the box or untick it. Next we have some which aren't actually real questions at all, like we've got here label, heading, subheading and subtext. Now these 4 don't actually have any text boxes, they're just for display purposes. Like this big one here which says online application, that is a heading. You can also have smaller subheadings. You can have labels, which just a piece of text on the screen with no text box, or you can have subtext, which is a font which is even smaller than the normal font. Another option is just to have a blank. If we choose blank, then all that will do is leave a blank space on the screen. There will be no text boxes, no captions or anything, and we can use this one just for layout purposes. Next after that we have some special fields, these 5 here: name, email, phone, mobile and property address. Now we should use these text boxes where appropriate. Each one of these can only be asked once per questionnaire. Now the reason we would choose something like name, once the prospective tenant has entered their name, if we then convert them to a real tenant, that information, the name, email, phone and mobile, will be automatically copied from their online application across to the actual tenant record inside RentHQ. So we should use these appropriately. And the address, I'll come back to this one shortly, the property address. Just remember this one, property address, I'll come back to that one. So for this case I'm asking for the person's full name. So the best question type should actually be name, because that matches what it is that I'm asking for. The next option we have down here is whether the question should be mandatory or not. If the question is mandatory, then they cannot submit the application until they have entered something into the text box. My suggestion is don't have too many mandatory questions, otherwise people might not bother to fill in the entire application. Next we have how wide do we want to have this question on the screen. So by default it's 100%, or I can actually make the question narrower. For example, I might make it this size, which is a lot narrower. If I choose OK, you'll see the question is now a lot narrower than it was before. If I edit it again and make it wider, you'll see it's now wider on the screen. The other option down here is a mobile screen width. Now the mobile screen width is the width of the screen when you're on a very small screen, such as a mobile phone. Mobile phones have very narrow screens, especially when in portrait mode. So we might want to make the question half the width on a large screen, but on a small mobile screen we might choose to leave it at the full 100% width. I'm now going to take a look at another application that I've already created, a sample application. This one here has got a lot more questions, as you can see. Now I've got a couple of buttons up here to preview my questionnaire, and if I push this preview button here, this is going to preview it on a normal size large screen. I'll get a link at the bottom which I click on, and there you can see my application, what my application will look like on a full size screen. There's the questions down there. So this is just a preview at the moment. And if I push the second button here, which is the preview on a mobile width, and I open this link, we can now get a rough idea of what the application might look like on a narrow screen like a mobile phone. As you can see, all of my questions are now full screen width, except for a few like these two. You'll also notice that the label is actually above the text box. That just means we've got more room on the screen. So once we've finished adding all our questions and we're happy with our questionnaire, we want to now get tenants to actually use it. So we can use this button here to get a web address. And this gives us a special URL, and this URL is what we would send to our prospective tenants. We could either email it to them, or we could put this onto our own website if we have a website. We could embed it in there, or we could include it in our online advertising. You know, if we're advertising a property for rent on an online website, we could include this URL. We've got a couple of options up here. One option is to include the property. You notice it adds an additional option on the end here. Now if we include the property, then this application means that this person is applying for a specific property. If we want to just put it on our website and we want people to apply without a specific property, we can leave the property off. But if we're applying for a specific property, then we can include it. And if we do this, the property address will automatically get included on the application. They won't have to fill it in, it'll be filled in for them. Another option down here is to include a property manager. Which one of our property manager logins we want to include. Now if we include that, once the application has been completed, an email will be sent to the property manager if that specific person has an email address set up in their security login. But for now I'm going to leave that as blank, and I'm only going to include a property. Now what I can do is I can copy that, or I can copy it to the clipboard, and I can now open another browser window and pretend like I'm an actual tenant. So I've opened a Chrome browser window. Now if I paste that into there, this is what a tenant would see after you've emailed them this application. As you can see, it's automatically filled in the address. That's that property address field that I was talking about. Because I've included the property in the URL, it's automatically included the property address. Now I can now start filling in questions, like this one here, it wants a date. This one here wants a name, so I'm going to put my name as Demo Tenant. Phone number, mobile number, email address, whatever else I want to put in there. I can fill in all the questions. I won't bother filling in all of them. And then I can submit the application. So this is what a tenant would do. After the application has been submitted, they get a thank you message. Now if we go back to RentHQ, I'll close this. I've now got a new menu option. If I go to Tenants and Prospects, I can now take a look at what applications people have already made. So I can say load all applications from the last 7 days. And there's that demo tenant that I created just now. So if I click on that, I can see the application and all the information that I entered. So this is the phone number and mobile number and email address that I entered. In here I can now give this person a rating if I want to, so I could say maybe this is a 4-star rating for this person. I can add any additional notes I might want to put about that tenant, like I might want to say that their credit check was good, landlord reference was just okay, something like that, and I can save it. Later I might choose to actually select this tenant and use them as my real tenant. They were a prospect and I've now offered them the property and they have accepted. So I can now push this button down here and choose to convert to tenant. That takes me to the tenant details screen. The tenant's name has already been filled in. This is what the tenant entered when they filled in the application form. You'll also notice down here these are the phone numbers that I entered and the email address that I entered. All I got to do is fill in a few additional fields, like choose which property I'm actually going to enter them for. Although they may have applied for one property, we may have chosen to give them a different property. And choose a start date and save. And I'll enter a short code. And that person has now been created as an actual tenant inside the system. And that is the end of this tutorial.